Just snap the ball.
Okay, let's not fuck around. Let's do that.
There's no pregame. There's no national anthem. It's just
I like it.
Go.
Oh, Derek, do you bet on the national anthem?
No. What's the bet?
Oh, this is one of the biggest year and most controversial bets each Super Bowl. Like they give an over-under.
Of how long?
Of how long.
Oh, God.
But then they have the flyover at the same time. So there's this always like controversial, like they don't know the official time and different bet sites always mess it up.
Dude, the fact that people bet on all this stuff blows my mind.
Well, there's exciting stuff like what color is the Gatorade dump on the coach at the end. There's so much. Yeah. I love it.
Well, Derek, thanks for coming on Power Athlete Radio. And we're going to discuss not only what's happening with the NFL draft and lack of, the combine, and really just wrap a little bit of Super Bowl. So I can tell that you're rooting for the Chiefs. It could be the fact that you got Big Red.
What gives that away?
I see Big Red sitting over there on your left shoulder, and he's looking like the Kool-Aid man, ready to kick in the door for another Super Bowl.
Maybe I just like cheeseburgers, huh?
Yeah. Let's get a cheeseburger. He does love him a cheeseburger.
Yeah, no, it's, I have certain loyalties, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but every year I reassess them, and I figured by the AFC Championship, I'm pretty good with this bet, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it was, you did bring up a good point before we started recording. I thought the Bills game would be more competitive. I like Josh Allen. I think he's a hell of a quarterback. I really like seeing these two guys play against each other gives us a snapshot for like the next 10 years in the NFL. So I was really kind of hoping to see the Bills come out, and they usually have such a high-powered offense, and it was pretty interesting to see the Chiefs just kind of dismantle them piece by piece.
Yeah, and then the connection with Diggs, I thought it was going to, even if they're going to try to prevent that, it's still going to be there, and they would exploit it a little more. But I guess the game plan on defense for Spagnuolo was pretty good and created a lot of confusion, or. I don't know, but I'm anticipating that might happen this game, because Spagnuolo has a little experience playing against Brady. So,
oh man, there are layers to this.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's so incestuous. I mean, geez, when I went to the Eagles, Spags was our DB coach, and then, moved up obviously and got head coaching jobs and went through and then came back as the defense coordinator. He's done very well. Yeah.
I mean, do you think he'll get looked at for another head coaching position anytime soon?
Man, this head coaching deal is really interesting. I mean, the fact that Eric Bieniemy didn't get hired as a head coach. I forget the name of the guy they brought into the Eagles, but I don't know if I did watch his press conference, which wasn't a good indicator of things to come.
That was mind blowing. That was mind blowing.
I missed it. What happened?
You missed it.
Yeah. Go back and watch it. I mean, I realize he's a young guy in his 30s, but as a coordinator and as an individual who was prepping to be a head coach in the NFL, and I always go back with this little bit of knowledge. I remember talking to Andy Reid years ago that he carried this book around. And every time he saw something he liked that Steamholm or Holmgren did, or if somebody did as a coach, or something within the practice plan or something was unique, he wrote it down and took a note. And the book was supposed to be his blueprint for when he got his chance. Here was all the mistakes he wasn't going to make. This is how he was going to go through. And I always thought that was pretty interesting that, as a, offensive lineman, quarterbacks coach, tight ends coach for Green Bay, he had this idea that he was going to be a head coach. And he goes from being a tight ends coach for Green Bay, gets a head coaching job. And I think what he did is when he went into his interview, he was so well prepared. He had a game plan. He knew it, and he had, really just interned under the best in that, in that deal. Goes in and obviously now is, considered one of the best. So it's pretty interesting to see him. I forget the name of the guy that they brought into the Eagles, which was kind of a long shot. I was really surprised on that one. I thought they would have either brought in Eric Bieniemy or maybe a Deuce Staley or somebody else, but that was kind of a left field pick.
Do you think that they didn't bring Bieniemy in because of Peterson and the coaching tree issue, or I don't know, perceived issue, or
maybe?
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe. Because Eric Bieniemy not only played at the Eagles, but then went in and, was a coach for Andy. Doug Peterson, same deal. So maybe they were trying to figure out like, okay, we had Andy here. We brought in somebody from his staff. We don't need to bring in another person from, that kind of Andy Reid coaching tree. So maybe this was kind of a break. But So the guy gets up and, Philly's such a rough crowd. I mean, they booed Santa Claus. Like it snowed one game and they put batteries in the snowballs. They were breaking glass in the bathrooms on the mirrors, putting it in the snowballs and throwing. So, I mean, it's already a brutal place. You got Angelo Cataldi and I mean, it's just a brutal place, which, and they pride themselves on it. So the guy goes in for his, introduction, his press conference, and the dude is stuttering, like incomplete trains of thought, can't get a night. I mean, it was just, I watched it and I was like, oh man. And then of course it's like, well, we didn't bring him here to talk. And I'm like, dude, really the head coach has got to be the conduit for the team to the press. I mean, Bill Belichick obviously being the, exception to that rule, but how much is the head coach really coaching, day to day? I mean, some guys are offensive coordinators, whatnot, but really they're the general on the field and they got to be able to inspire confidence in their, and bring in the right staff to do what they need to do. So the guy did not inspire confidence.
No, and the irony was that he was talking about how he was going to make things simple and easy to understand, yet he couldn't communicate that. Like, we're going to simplify things and make it very easy for the players to understand. But it took him 5 minutes to get that out. And at least Belichick's not stammering over his, we got Cincinnati, we got Cincinnati, right? Like, he's very direct, right? But yeah, I felt for the Philly fans there, because it's like, okay, who do we got? Oh, we got this guy. Okay, great. So we'll see.
The other thing too is, I think they were in a rush to hire. I think, if you're waiting for a head coach, you got to at least wait till the Super Bowl's done. And then you get an opportunity to, cherry pick somebody off Andy's staff or, off of Tampa, or, bring in the right guy. But, it just feels like a lot of the hires this year, David Culley was our receivers coach and, for the Eagles, and been a receivers coach for a number of years. Now, all of a sudden he gets his head chance. So I'm just really surprised. And I know Culley, I mean, he's a competent individual. I never really thought of him as a head coach, but I mean, guy's been in the game a long time and, probably deserves his opportunity. But I'm just really surprised Eric Bieniemy didn't get a job. I mean, dude,
does it hurt to be a successful playoff coordinator because you're missing out on these opportunities to make that first contact, first impression with interviews?
They're already interviewing. So, like if a team were to contact the Chiefs and say, hey, we want to interview Eric Bieniemy for your head coaching job, Andy goes 100%. I mean, and Andy even came out and said, hey, Eric should be a head coach, should get a chance. So he wouldn't go in there and, do the proverbial cock block and, pull a Belichick and be like, no, you can't interview. So just kind of an interesting chance. And then, Deuce Staley, Deuce was there too. I mean, these guys are both Philly guys. I mean, played for the team, coached in the organizations, were there when the Super Bowl. I don't understand the reasoning to try to sever that.
Yeah. And do you think, both you guys, do you think that, it's a different kind of year where there's not going to be the combine? We'll talk about that. I talked to another coach yesterday, and about off-season training may just be the same as last year. Like, hey, you're on your own till we see you in July. So there's not a huge rush. Who knows when the draft's going to happen, but there's not this rush to let's get organized and prepare for next season. So why this sort of shotgun approach of well, we got to get our guy before the Super Bowl and we got to pull the trigger?
I think that there's a sense of urgency with all the teams that, they have to, there's only a finite amount of good people and you got to get your guy early, because if not, you're going to be the last one without a chair to sit on. And I don't know if that makes sense, especially in this new environment and the way things are going. I mean, I could see it if the combine was coming up in, 6 weeks. But I mean, we've already established there is no combine, so now these guys are going to be, working within the draft and personal workouts and bringing guys in. But I mean, the front office staff is usually pretty intact. Like when they change a coaching staff and they bring that a new individual in, I mean, the front office and the scouts and the people that are actually looking at players, those guys are in kind of a different department. Very few times do you see the front office get whacked at the same time a coaching staff gets whacked. So they're going to come in, they're going to bring in their same players. And it's not like the coaches are complete like noobs that just show up. A lot of these guys have already established coaches. They're coming from other places. They already have rapport. They already understand it. It's just like an interesting merry-go-round. It's like this guy goes here, and it's just kind of the minute that a guy gets a job, he brings in all his buddies, and they're coming from other places, and it's all the same pool. So I don't know what the sense of urgency was. I just thought it was an interesting move to try to break from, the Mike Holmgren, Andy Reid tree in Philly and bring in somebody who, man, he maybe we'll chalk it up to that dude just being nervous, but dude did not have did not inspire confidence in his press talk.
Yeah, very, well, not really, but sort of Adam Gase-like, where you're like, okay, that was a good opening presser. Like,
oh God. And what's crazy is, Philly, we were so close for so many years, and then kind of had some downturn, and then, they separate from Andy, and then they bring in Doug Peterson. Doug takes him to the Super Bowl in 2 years. And, here we are 2 years removed, and he's without a job, which is pretty interesting. I'd love to know the backstory on that one. And from what I was reading, it had to do with, friction with the quarterback. And They decided to, go with their big money guy over their coach, which seems kind of crazy to me. But, yeah. So,
yeah. And I'm even, and you can shed some more light on this, but I'm still even surprised that they parted ways with Andy back, 2010 was it?
Mm-hmm.
Because clearly he can win games. Like, and again, since 2011 with Kansas City, they may not have been necessarily Super Bowl contenders, but their record is very good.
Yeah.
With different quarterbacks and different players. And so it's very interesting that they decided to part ways, and who knows, right?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think, Andy went to, what was it? We played in 3 NFC championship games, and then that 4th year, he finally gets the Super Bowl and loses. And I think that there was just, and then that deal with his son committing suicide, and there was a whole bunch of really just bad press, and, they go to the house and, pills everywhere. And it was just really, really ugly. And, knowing the Philly press and the way they portrayed it. And, when I saw this going down at the end of my career, like, man, any negativity that Andy and I had surely went out the window, and I just feel for him and saw that bad situation happening. And I think in a lot of ways, change is never a bad thing, right? But him leaving all of that behind and going to a new place like Kansas City, with Dick Vermeil, having been a coach, and you can kind of look at this almost like this history of a Philly coach going to KC, and Lamar Hunt had passed away, so his son's running the business now. I just think there was a lot of like renewing, and, Andy coming in and coming to Kansas City, bringing his offense, bringing his staff, being able to go in there and do it again. And there's always an idea that, you do it the first time, and then the second time you get a chance, you do it better. And, and then they struck gold with Patrick Mahomes. The fact that people passed him up on the draft board, and, finally the Chiefs land their marquee quarterback. And then at that point, just start building it. And it's really, Andy's an offensive coordinator, offensive mind. To have somebody that you can do that much, have that much creativity with, just goes to show, and really seeing it in his offense.
Yeah. How much do you think Mahomes' development was due to Andy Reid's tutelage and obviously Alex Smith, whereas Deshaun Watson or whoever else you want to put in there, and how that was not as good a progression, or,
Well, look at, Andy had, was with Holmgren with Brett Favre, and, also had Alex Smith. I mean, not Alex Smith. Green Bay.
Rodgers?
Yeah, it was Rodgers. So Rodgers was the backup to Favre.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah. While Andy was there. And then, obviously comes to Philly, Peterson, drafts McNabb, and then, got, Coy Detmer and AJ Feely ready to play, and then brings in, other players, and, even brings in Michael Vick, and keeps developing these guys. And, it was pretty interesting for each quarterback.
Jeff Garcia.
Yeah, Jeff
shined.
Garcia.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So, was able to kind of get it done with a lot of different quarterbacks. And I remember, the game plan that we ran with McNabb wasn't the same game plan we ran with Coy or AJ or any of the other quarterbacks. So he was pretty quarterback centric on like, hey, instead of bending to what I want to call plays that my quarterback can shine and do well and put him in the best position to win. And then at the end of the day, you make sure you have a big offensive line that can run the ball when you need it, and just need some real dynamic receivers and a good tight end, which, we had with God, what was his name? Chad. He was a Mormon dude. God, we had some really good tight ends when I was in Philly, and I think the game plan's pretty, when I watch the plays, I mean, they're sliding to guys, they're moving. I mean, they're running the ball, they're mixing it up. They're really putting a lot of trick plays and letting Mahomes do what he does. And he's such a good player. Like, he has such an interesting, like, view of the field and how he plays. I mean, he's exciting to watch.
Yeah, because we kind of saw it last year a bit with Matt Moore. Like, I think they were 2-1 and had a close game against Green Bay. And then this year with Henny, he played, a couple of quarters, but it seems like, you put anybody back there, you're going to have some reasonable amount of success just based on how they set things up. And, they have obviously all this great talent around the quarterback, but, we get into these Brady versus Belichick, who was the bigger influence, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, can you do that with Reed versus Mahomes?
I don't know. We'll see when Mahomes plays 20 years. I mean, like I was reading today that Tom Brady has had 3 Hall of Fame careers. So it was 2000 to 06, 07 to like 13, and then 13 to now. And they went through and like basically put his stats against other Hall of Fame quarterbacks. And he's had 3 Hall of Fame careers. I mean, which, got comeback player of the year. I mean, it's pretty interesting when they make the case that like this guy has had like, and the joke was that, the first Brady is retired and then this was his stunt double. And now this is the next stunt double. And I thought that was pretty funny because he really has had 3 Hall of Fame careers. Now, if Mahomes gets a chance to go, is going to go get a chance. But if Mahomes beats him here, what does Brady do? Does he come back?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Does he want to finish off on that loss, right?
But then if he wins the Super Bowl, I mean, it's pretty... I bet you it would be pretty concrete that if he loses, he comes back. The problem is if he wins, does he do the Peyton Manning and roll off into the sunset?
I can't see him doing that. He's just not that guy. Like, and obviously, we'll see what happens this game, but he doesn't seem to have the same health issues that would, kind of put a question mark up in terms of like arm strength. And I don't know. A lot of great storylines here. Definitely. But I when you're talking about the 3 different phases, I thought like it made me think of Elvis Presley, like young Elvis, and then like Blue Hawaii Elvis, and then Fat Elvis, right? Like there's different stages of his career, but he's managed to maintain his fitness pretty good through all of them.
Sure. I mean, that's the one thing that's pretty universal is he takes a ton of time, spends a ton of money on preparation and making sure he's right, and has a team around him, making sure that he's doing the right things going in. So, I mean, he's found for him personally, he's cracked the code for what it's allowed for longevity. Now, I don't know if that cracking of the code exists, past him, because he's probably a very unique individual, but it's pretty interesting that there's this kind of fine tuning, there's a certain code that each individual finds that allows them to do this. I also think that the rules have helped tremendously. Like the NFL that Brady played in for those first 6-7 years wasn't the same NFL that he's played in today. They've changed the rules. Now these guys, even if you touch a quarterback, it's, most guys are not pinning their ears back the way they were in those early years.
Yeah. So, aside from that ACL, he hasn't had too many injury issues from what I can recall. So, yeah, I think he comes back. I just think he's going to be like the Rolling Stones, man. Like he's just going to keep coming back.
You're like, right? Here he is again. I was laughing thinking of Kenny Stabler when, I remember as a kid watching a game and Kenny Stabler taking off his helmet and he had like a full head of gray hair. And the hilarious part was I thought Kenny Stabler was probably like 100 years old then. And I think Kenny Stabler, when I saw him, was like way younger than Brady. He just he just had smoked cigarettes and obviously aged faster. But I mean, Tom looks probably better today than he did when he was a rookie. They were showing his picture for the Super Bowl for this one pass, or for the one from the first Super Bowl, and he looks a lot more put together and in better shape and more relaxed and more fit 20 years later than he did as a 23-year-old kid.
Well, how old is he now? Like 43?
Yeah, he's a year younger than me.
Yeah, so think about this recent trade. Like they're talking about Stafford at 33, I think it is. And it's like, well, not an issue. This guy's got 10 more years, right? So he's created this precedent.
Yeah. I mean, as dude, when you all of a sudden hit that 10-year mark in the NFL, they started looking around to replace you, or at least they did. Now these guys are like, no, he's just hitting his stride. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is what? How many years is he in? 13?
he's 37.
Yeah. So he's got to be 13 years in, because I think he did, JC year and the whole deal. But I mean, now it's like because of Brady's precedent, What do you think of that Matthew Stafford Goff trade?
I like Stafford. Like I, again, it's one of those things where like all these people who've been banished to the Lions and never really got, the Barry Sanders. And then I remember
Megatron.
Charlie Francis worked with Johnny Morton. And I guess, I remember talking to Johnny and he was like, well, I didn't get all the looks from the quarterback. I could have been so much better. Like it just wasn't a great situation there. But, so there's all these guys that have been there and never realized their, full potential in terms of playoffs and Super Bowl. So I kind of look at him and go, I enjoy watching him play. And I think there's something there. So it's really, it is a bit exciting to see what they do with it. And I hope it does work out. On the other hand, I feel bad for Goff. Like, did you
see his statement? He's like, I just want to go somewhere where somebody wants me. And like he said that, and all I could picture was like little box boy kicking a can, like, burr, 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 burr. And but the really good quote was Detroit wasted a Hall of Fame quarterback with Matthew Stafford. They've wasted, by just being Detroit. And so the fact here he gets a chance to go down and go into a team that's, has the opportunity to go play and make it to the Super Bowl very quickly and has the players around him to do it. And what's pretty amazing is that the Rams sat down and looked and said, we're one player away. If we had that dude, we could win the Super Bowl. And I think, and they paid Goff a lot of money and, he's won some games for him. But to sit down and be like, okay, if we had this dude, I mean, because it never works like that. It's not like, or maybe it does. Maybe we're one player away. If this dude was just this guy and we're willing to take that bet, which I appreciate, and trade a bunch of draft picks for it. So pretty interesting. I bet you too. I mean, man, I don't know what the contracts are, if they're going to redo them or they're just swapping contracts, but I bet you Goff's probably making more money than he was.
Oh, Matthew Stafford got paid. So
he did.
I'm sure like the extra draft pick that they threw in, the second rounder, was just to take on the burden of Goff's contract.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Oh, you mean Goff's or Stafford's?
Well, even accepting of this.
I mean, both of those guys got paid. Both
Correct.
of those guys got paid. I just wonder who got paid more, because then
probably Goff, because it came after.
Yeah.
But both of them are over $100 million men.
Well, then it's a pretty easy.
I like it because this ups the price tag for Mr. Deshaun Watson and hopefully get some draft picks back for the Texans.
Did you see what David Culley said? I didn't come here to not coach Deshaun Watson.
Ooh, I do like that.
And I do like that. But the problem is like, and I like David Culley. I always got along really well with him. I mean, obviously, he never coached me directly, but I always had a good rapport with him. I always remember he was one of our guys on bed check. He used to always bust his balls, him and Pat Shermer. So I was telling these guys that Culley and Shermer used to come around, and Shermer would come in the room and drink beers with us in training camp. And it's funny now to see how many of those dudes on that staff that like we used to fuck with and come and drink beers are all head coaches now. From Spags to, now David Culley. You had Ron Rivera,
wow.
Who else? Sean McDermott.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, so I mean, all those guys were in that staff, so it's pretty interesting.
Wow.
Harbaugh. Yeah, John Harbaugh was our special teams coach.
So can you derive any formula around like how they dealt with you and how many beers they had with you that led to their success or lack of success?
I think really what it comes down to is the place that you go and the positions you get put in. I think you have to, like, if you're going to go to New York, you got to make sure all your shit's in one sock. Like, there can't be any fucking chinks in the armor. You have to not only be able to stand up and present, look the part, dress the part, act the part, and get up there and convince everybody that you are the head coach for the, New York Giants in the Big Apple, which a couple years ago meant something. Now I see these pictures in New York and now it looks like I am legend. But like it's true. I mean, like I always remember thinking, and it was funny, I always told Tony, the fact that he got drafted to Kansas City, I mean, he had a storied career, but if he had gone to New York, what kind of career would he have had as for the Giants? I mean, look at what Strahan's done, and obviously Tony's doing well too, but it's definitely where you get a chance to go. A guy like Andy goes down to Philly, he kind of fits the mold for that thing, and everybody really likes him, and then he gets a chance to go to Kansas City. So I think it's like like whoever the coach ends up being for the Dallas Cowboys, same thing. America's team, you got to deal with fucking Jerry Jones and all this other stuff, and you got to have a certain individual. So I think within that coaching staff and with those people, they need to look at just more than the X's and O's. Like, can that guy survive in this environment? So
who's in the best position of the head coaching hires? Like you talk about New York, and I thought of Saleh, but who's best position?
I think he's a great hire for the Jets. What I really liked about that dude is not only is a very thoughtful guy, but he's extremely fucking tart. Like, they were showing a bunch of videos of him like running stadiums before the games and training. And like, that dude, he's super fit, very, very focused, and really seems like a no nonsense guy. Perfect dude for the New York Giants. So they almost have to, for the Jets. They almost have to find an individual that kind of fits within, I would say, like the ethos of the city. And I think he's a good pick.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, how important is that? Because New York, Philly, even Kansas City has an ethos about it of the, and Kansas City very well. How important is that?
Andy's the perfect guy. He loves cheeseburgers and barbecue. Like, if anybody's ever been to the Kansas City Chiefs, so this blew my fucking mind. When I remember when they opened up the stadium on Saturdays, so people could show up at Saturdays at noon to start their tailgates, because people were upset that they didn't have enough time to get there and get their barbecue right. So like, we would go in, practice, and as we were leaving in the morning, all of a sudden we'd see the Winnebagos come in, and these dudes would start these like epic, like trailer barbecue, epic things. And, coming into the stadium on Saturday morning, the smell of smoke and barbecue, I was like, man, I know why Andy Reid came here. Because Andy does like to eat. And, obviously.
Have you been to Q39 in Kansas City? Yeah. So apparently they have like, he has that's where he goes, and it's like a bit, he goes there, and it's like, when, he comes in, I'm sure they put a robe on him. Like,
they probably carry
James
him.
Brown. Yeah.
He's
like
got a fucking
big chairs.
Yeah. He's got a big chair. Dude, he is to not only win a Super Bowl, but to be able to have this competitive a team and to really bring it. Like, there's no place. Like, I guarantee when we, we watch a Super Bowl, the amount of Kansas City fans that probably will try to get to the game and can't, that'll just be out there, will be unbelievable. Incredible fan base of individual, and they pull from that whole area. So it's really good. But I really think it takes a certain individual that pairs up with the kind of the personality. And I just don't think you can have chinks in your armor at this point. There's too much access with players, with social media. There's too many people like looking for you to fuck up, that if you go in and you have any chinks in the armor and everything's not completely perfect, I think you're going to really, really struggle, especially in those big markets.
Yeah. You got to check off every box. And it's much more difficult. Again, the team, I was talking to somebody from Seattle, and they were saying like, listen, we didn't have any COVID positives, and we're very careful about that. And, but I think it's much more important. And that's why I wanted to talk about off-season training, because you guys are going to be part of that over the next, 4 to 6 months. What should teams be trying to do in this off season, knowing that we're going to get back to the kind of COVID, no training camp, no OTAs, no off season training camp, no OTAs? What do you do with supervision? What do you try to place people with certain private sector people? Do you just let them fend for themselves? Like, I think it's a really interesting off season again.
Yes, all the above. I think the smartest thing would be for the teams to reach out to some private sector guys that are and kind of get some training groups. Like, if there were people here in, we'll use Austin, Texas, and they reached out to me and the guys here at Power Athlete and said, hey, we want to send 10 guys over every day, and this is what we want the facility to be. And it's a private facility. You guys don't have any members, but we want to go in and have you guys work with them and get them ready. And then we're going to send our coaches or send experts in, like yourself. And I think that's the way that they should handle it. Unfortunately, I bet you they're going to do this kind of like, well, you guys are professionals, go figure it out. And then, guys are going to have to figure it out. But I think I don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. But I bet you a lot of the teams are going to say to the guys, hey, it makes sense for you to live close to the team and then set up somewhere in a private facility somewhere else.
Yeah. It's again, it'll probably be different from each organization. Like, again, the team I was talking to, they're like, well, guys don't stick around here because of the weather. So it's very difficult for us. And so if you're maybe you're in Arizona, you're in Florida, LA, Southern California, it's a lot easier. But yeah, I just think, we had this discussion the other day. We were talking about strength and conditioning and unionization. There was an article about like, should strength coaches make a union? To which a lot of the reply was like, well, a lot of pro teams are gonna be like, okay, whatever, you want to be in a union, screw off. Like, we'll find somebody. Like, we don't want to deal with that. So, and especially,
aren't strength coaches in the coaches union? Because the coaches have a union.
I know that's a very good question. I mean, I know in the past, strength coaches would be eligible for things like pensions, NFL pensions, and all that, but I don't think that's happening now. I think it's different now. I don't know when it changed over, but it's not the same as it was. Like Jerry Palmieri at the Giants, right? He was under a certain system and he had his pension and all that, and and is done quite well. So that would be a very good question to figure out with the professionals. But the question was brought up. Well, okay, there's no off-season training, which would occupy whatever 8 to 10 weeks of strength coach's time at the facility preparing all these things. Now we don't need them. So do we just contract that position out for training camp, preseason training camp, the season? Maybe they come out to watch the combine. Maybe they come out for off-season training. Who knows if we're going to have off-season training the way the Players Association is kind of posturing. So I think it can be a little bit of an anxious time right now for what is the role of the strength coach in professional football. Are you paying this guy 12 months a year?
Well, I want to piggyback off that and ask the question for you, John. Where does the value come with the strength coach? Because we've had a number on, so it's not just the X's and O's and the workouts. Where have you seen value from these guys to the teams you've been a part of?
So I was in kind of a unique situation in that I never got an off-season workout deal. So because, all these guys were getting paid within their off-season workout deal, so they had to make these X amount of workouts at the facility, and there was no financial benefit for me being there. So if there was no financial benefit and I was going to be spending my money to be there anyway, I was going to spend my money on what I thought was the best training. And so for me, that was down in Tampa. I trained with Rafael Ruiz, and we had a bunch of present or current NFL players that showed up every single day. And at one point we had like 15 NFL players that were showing up every day to train. And our training groups were insane. Like the competition, the sprinting, the running. And all of a sudden, I'd go back and they'd be like, oh, so-and-so made every workout this offseason. And I'd be like, oh, good for him. And they'd be like, oh, you didn't, the only ones you made were OTAs. I'm like, great, let's line up. Let's go into the testing. And I would go in and absolutely fucking kick the doors off and smash all the testing, go in and win the conditioning test, and then go in there and be fine and be like, I guess all those workouts were really valuable, and watch that guy get cut. So I think for a majority of the individuals, especially like people like me, and I remember asking him one time, like, hey, how come I don't get a workout season or like off-season workout deal? And they were like, well, we know you're going to come back in shape. Why the fuck would we waste money? We only waste money on people that we are worried about, that we think are going to be problems. And I was like, fuck. Okay, so I lost out on a bunch of money on that way by actually being a try-hard, guy that wanted to come in shape and be able to rock it. But it wouldn't scare me in the least. Like for me personally, if they said, hey, there's no OTAs, no off-season training, nothing, I would go down and I already had my regimen set. I knew where we were going. I knew the facility. I knew everything. I already had that set. And I would also, I didn't have a home gym, but I guarantee if after last season, if I was playing and I didn't have a home gym this season, by right now, I would have had fucking $100,000 worth of Sorinex and every piece of equipment I wanted. I would either built a building, cleaned out my garage, built it downstairs. I would not have been in that situation ever again. That if we go back into quarantine or there's some issue, I would have just built my own training facility, found an individual to come in, true form sprinters, hills, whatever we needed. Guys have available income and they can spend it on that. And at the end of the day, it's a bitch and tax write-off. And if you build that in your house, it only is going to add value to it. It seems like I have a friend who's a pretty big builder here in Austin, and every architect now is designing fitness rooms and gyms. And he came to me and said, hey, this architect's creating this. Does this look okay? And I was like, it looks a little small. What does he want to do? Does he want to lift weights? What is the ceiling height? But they're not building homes without some form of weight room, training facility, training room area now in homes. So I think that's a real thing. But I do know that there's probably some people in your area that are doing some pretty good stuff. You just have to be able to link up with them.
Well, that's certainly a good business model there. Like, help design home gyms for pro athletes, especially now. I assume that there's not going to be the same run on equipment that there was last year in a short amount of time. So now you have some time to plan what you want this facility to look like so that you don't have to go somewhere else where it could be closed. So I think, get together with some equipment companies and set some stuff up for home gyms. That seems like a great opportunity. So.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can only control what you can touch. And so, like, for example, Power Athlete and, the building we have, we control everything in that environment. So, I know who comes through the door. I know how the whole thing works. And, there's really no random occurrence. And if it was something where some players were coming in, it'd just be like, hey, man, well, it's off limits. It's just for these guys. We don't want to put these guys in a stressful situation. We want them to come in. We don't want them to be training at a commercial gym and doing some bullshit and maybe potentially get infected and get injured. So I think it's really just going to come down to the front office and the staff looking and seeing who's out there and then being able to reach out and place their players with some good coaches. And then who has resources to do it. Like, for example, if we got contacted, just like I'm sure if you got contacted, I'd be like, no problem. We have everything to do it, and we got a whole fucking system for you. Come on in. These guys will get ready. If you send me offensive linemen, it'll even be even better.
Well, Broncos are lined up with Landau Performance out in Denver.
Yeah.
Maybe they foresaw it coming.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that this is kind of a tipping point or a pivot point where everything from here on is going to be different? Like, we're not going to go back to the old way. It's going to be, hey, we had a full NFL season and we got a pretty exciting Super Bowl. Why do we need an off season? Do you think maybe the Players Association might be pushing that direction because, hey, it worked out okay, regardless of the 45, whatever ACLs, the 17 Achilles ruptures. That's close enough to what it used to be, even though we didn't have a preseason. But I kind of think it might go that way. It's just a very easy sell. Like, yeah, everything's good. We did pretty good. Why do we need that off season?
I think what you're seeing is like the current effect. So we're seeing like, okay, here's just 1 year, but we have the last, let's say 10, 20 years of doing it a certain way. So we have that momentum, that kind of that wave crashing far over on the shore where, hey, you're bringing in guys from Super Bowl. Do they really need an off season? Do they really need this? And, guys are probably beat up and the guys that are really playing are in this. The problem is when these guys age out, and those other guys that have been kind of indoctrinated into this new thing and haven't seen that far wave. Like we used to have, guys that were 8, 9, 10-year vets that didn't practice during the week. And they went in and played fine on Sundays. And they always said, hey, this guy's taken a ton of reps. He's had a lot of opportunities. He played in a lot of games. He might not need as much prep work during the week. You put a young guy in that situation and his fucking feet go crossed and his eyes go crossed and he ends up, getting murdered. So I think what we're seeing is this kind of wave breaking far effect where, as these guys are coming, they see the wave, it crashes, and now everybody's kind of getting better. But eventually that wave's going to start crashing short. And I think that's where we're going to see it. So I think for 1 year, maybe even 2, you're fine. But at some point, they're going to have to go back to a little bit of this. I mean, just for the talent evaluation point to miss the preseason's huge. I mean, that's where all the young guys and all the talent gets kind of evaluated. I mean, Patrick Mahomes isn't getting evaluated in the preseason. But his backup is his third, some young guy that comes in and all of a sudden it's the third string running back who might potentially start for you in midseason. That's the guy you assess. And without those games and without that offseason, it's really hard to kind of put your finger on those guys.
Well, it's interesting. You have two teams, one team that pretty much is the same team as last year. And I think they benefited from having that continuity. And then you have another team where they kind of, pieced it together, albeit with one of the greatest quarterback of all time. But what do you see there in terms of the contrast?
Well, they brought in a bunch of home run. I mean, you got Flournoy, who was a Heisman Trophy winner, has a bad experience in Jacksonville, comes in as a free agent, and that dude can run. And he's 4 years in? You bring in, we forget AB was one of the best receivers in the game. Goes through all of his, whatever he's got going on, still an incredibly talented player. You bring Gronk back and, happy Gronk is way better than sad Gronk. He gets a year off. He feels pretty good, puts him into the system. Think about how many Super Bowls and how much experience that those guys have, so you bring in talented, experienced players into that situation that understand that they are there for 1 or 2 years to get this Super Bowl and get it done. And I think that there's an incredible sense of urgency. And I'm not a huge Bruce Arians fan. I know we had Jason Dunn on, who was our tight end at the Chiefs, and JD likes him. I just never really liked him. Whenever I hear, he's a player's coach, what that means to me is that the players are running shit. I was like a coach who's like not necessarily a disciplinarian, but like nobody is thinking that the players are running shit. So whenever I hear players coach, I just think fucking, here's some guy who bends over every chance he gets whenever at the players' whims. And but Arians has done well. You gave him enough weapons. I hope to God you bring in Tom Brady, you're going to win some fucking games.
Yeah, and if you're a player's coach and you got Tom Brady and he's kind of taken over, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I'd be like,
yeah. I've been in a lot of situations where players coaches have absolutely crumbled because the people that, roll up to seize power aren't necessarily the best character. Believe me, it's real easy to be a Tom Brady or a player's coach when Tom Brady's your spokesman.
Yeah, I was watching like a documentary on the Lakers and Celtics, and that was kind of the Magic Johnson thing. Like, don't worry, I got it. Like, I can't remember who it was, if it was Pat Riley starting out, but it was, yeah, I got it, coach, don't worry. And they kind of just let him do what he wanted to do. And hey, look at that. That guy's a great coach, so.
Yeah. Well, you got to be smart enough to step back and, let playmakers be playmakers. And I think that's what they've done in Tampa. But I'll tell you, it was pretty interesting when they kind of were in that weird mid-season slump. And then Bruce Arians was kind of shooting some shade and casting a little bit on Tom Brady. And I was like, holy shit, I don't know how this is going to end well. And I guess Tom probably took that shit personally and went out there and was like, you think so? I'm going to torch you. And so it was probably a pretty good move by him. But I was like, holy shit, I'm not going to take that bet.
Yeah, that could have backfired.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been good. It's really a pretty fascinating idea. But I know they're getting rid of the combine, which feels antiquated. The combine was never about... to me, like the way the combine was always explained, it's a check mark. So they watch all this film on you in college. They talk to you. They have an idea who you are. Now they put a test out. And what they're trying to do is see if you study for the test. If like they think you're a 5 flat guy and you can do 30 reps at 225 and you're going to vert 30 inches and you're going to run a, 509, 503, something, whatever it is. And they put you into this scale and then you show up and you do what they think you're going to do. You get a check. If you do a little bit better, oh, this guy's a little bit better than we thought he was. But if you shit the bed and you come in and you run terrible and you don't bench, you don't do anything, then what they assume is that you didn't study for the test and you're not the guy they thought you were. So all that happens is when they go to the combine, they watch a guy, just check marks. He is the person that we know him to be. He studied for the test. He prepared for it. And it gives him a chance to interview. So that's the way the combine,
get the medical done too.
Yeah. The days of the Mike Mamulas where, guys on nobody's chart comes in and absolutely fucking demolishes the combine. And then they draft him number 1. I think those days are past because teams have been burned so many times by those individuals who just come out and they're a, one combine wonder was the comment that they used to use. And then they go back and then, teams like Al Davis and other ones where it's, I'm going to draft the fastest guy and this guy blew it up at the combine and these guys don't pan out. So I think the teams are pretty sharp. They watch a ton of film. They watch every game, everything you've ever done. They put you through private workouts and those coaches make an assessment if you're the type of guy they want to bring in. And then they go up on the draft board and it's kind of very systematic. They kind of list all their players. And if there's a guy get drafted, they kind of knock them off. And if they got 3 quarterbacks and everyone gets drafted, then they're going to go with that 4th guy. So they're pretty strategic in how they do it.
Yeah, that was the weird thing for me of being at the combine a couple of different years. And I thought, okay, the first time I'm like, oh, this is going to be interesting. I want to see how, what the discussion is around the players and the performances. And it was pretty much crickets. It was like, there were strength coaches. I said, well, are they going to involve you in the evaluations and help assess? And no, I'm going to go get a beer with, my friend I used to work with over here. And then we're going to go to, it had nothing to do with looking at physical assessments and grading players. Most of the intensity was around like, let's get the medicals done. Let's get the interviews done. Like you said, and we'll scrape something from that. But there was absolutely no fanfare, at least internally, around the testing. It was more just the show for the NFL and to kind of keep people looking at the NFL at that time. So it was a little disappointing.
Well, but what we're seeing is a change in technology. So, before everything got so digital and before we got so jiggy with all this stuff, scouts used to have to show up and they would literally watch film. And when I say watch film, watch VCRs, and then they got into cut-ups and then they had CDs, and now it's all digital and they can shoot stuff. But these guys physically would show up and they would get every tape of every game, and they would put these scouts in rooms and they would watch. They'd be there 3 days and they would watch every single game you played. They would write evals, and then you would go and then they would call you in and they would meet with you. And I remember this guy had watched, I think he was from the Jets. He had watched, he was a scout. He watched every film, and then he came in and said, "Hey, which film do you think I should watch to show your best representation?" And I was like, "Fuck, I don't know. Anyone. Pick anyone." And he picked one. We went through it, and then he wrote me like an email, or he was like, "Hey, here's what I saw." Whatever. He left, and then a week later, the offensive line coach flew out and put me through like 3 workouts in 2 days. It was like, like we just kept doing more and more shit, and then I remember he's like, it's pretty good. We're probably going to take you with our 2nd or 3rd round pick. And I was like, oh shit. And then they didn't draft me. Like all of a sudden their 2nd round pick goes, the 3rd round pick goes. I had teams calling and telling me, hey, we're going to take you with our 2nd or 3rd round pick. And fuck, I got drafted by the Eagles. I was the 2nd pick in the 4th round. And I watched all those people just keep, but it's the way the draft board, they rank players on this. And when guys go in, it's just kind of a numbers game. So, at the time you kind of take it personally, but then you understand the way it worked. So
are we going to see a swing back to the big 5 schools dominating? Because now they can say, hey, you're going to get a University of Oklahoma pro day. So when your time is up, your 3-4 years, we're going to make sure, since there's no combine, pro day versus there's one dude I want to highlight, Ali Marpet. He's number 74 on Tampa Bay, Division III All-Star, now starting in a Super Bowl.
Yeah. I what's pretty amazing. And, if you're a good player, they're going to find you. It doesn't matter if you're in the 3rd, but I guarantee he came in undrafted, got a chance.
Actually 2nd round, but he
was a 2nd round draft pick out from a Division III school.
1 in a million.
Dude, that's pretty unbelievable. But I think for big schools, their sell is, hey, we're going to get you on national TV more often. If you come here, you're going to get a chance to play in the biggest games, to play in the biggest stages, which is going to help you get to the next level.
Just pure exposure.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a bit of a time machine where it's going to go back to the old way, I guess. It's funny. I broke out my old vinyl records from like the 70s and 80s. And, I was kind of worried that maybe, I played them too much, but then a lot of the time all I did was play them once and transfer it to a cassette. And then I just, but you had to actually, you can't drag and drop the songs, right? Into a playlist. You actually had to put the needle on the record and then listen to the song as it's recording. And you're like, okay, maybe I have to adjust the levels, re-record that. But it was an entirely different process, kind of like what you described with game film, where you're like, it took a lot more time and patience. And I think there was some value to that. Whereas now it's, maybe there's not as much thought. What do you think about that?
They had a deal where, so they always had like a main video guy, and I'm just going back to Cal. And I remember the coach would go in and, scout would be like, hey, I need every, red zone play. And then the dude would have to go through and like do all the cuts. And like, it took forever. And so like they had to go do their homework. They had to show up. Now, it's like a push of a button, just emails it to them. So, I mean, the way these coaches are getting their cut-ups, I mean, I think there's some like universal program that they all log into and they can cut and send. And
they have it for all sports, lacrosse even just cuts up, and they, you highlight the color of the jersey and then they know when you're on. Yeah.
And it's all AI. So, I mean, I think they have a ton. And you know what? Like they're also going to have, the coaches to talk to. If they're worried about a guy's training, they're going to walk in and talk to the strength coach. So I think, which has always been the value, that college strength coach would probably have a little bit more weight than he ever had. But who knows how the NFL evolves? I think sometimes, I think a change is good to change the system. But I said at the end of the day, like the only way you get ready to play football is by playing football. And you do that in OTAs, you do that in, in training camp, and the fact that they're cutting training camp and they're cutting this and they're cutting preseason, like that's when I see But you know what? I'm glad to be wrong. The quality go down, but who knows? Maybe this year the quality's been better because guys were ready. But who knows? Maybe that's a carryover effect.
Yeah, you're right. There was this accumulation of 10 years of doing it this way, and then 1 year we're going to see a market correction in 3 years, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
the injury thing, man. Like, I follow your Instagram, and you're pretty good on all this injury stuff. And the only thing I could think of is a lot of these injuries are non-contact injuries.
yes.
The Achilles ruptures or this. I mean, these are all non-contact. And I'm thinking like, why are these happening? We can go through all the mechanisms. You can watch it, but I really think it comes down to people or not having the tissue prepared to accept that load. Or maybe it's some lingering issue or something's happening. And I just think they're going to have to find a way to kind of reduce that. And I think conventional medicine is failing them in that regard.
Yeah. Like there was a fellow who, I can't remember if he was a defensive back for the Chiefs. Did you see that one where he fractured his femur on a non-contact femur fracture? And I'm like, I have never heard of that. Like, usually when you hear femur fracture or pelvic fracture, some guy's like skiing in Aspen and hits a tree.
Yeah.
So, that kind of threw me that there's that type of injury, non-contact tragic injury is way too common.
Well, I mean, think about the femur. I mean, isn't the femur like the largest bone in the body? I mean, and the guy's a DB. So let's say he's under 200 pounds. So like, it's not like he's a 400-pound dude and, he's got some weakening of the bones and maybe, but I mean, who knows? That could also be indicative of something else. I mean, when you hear that, I think leukemia, cancer. I mean, like, is there something down the chain that's happening that this was just an indicator,
Yeah, no, I think about all those things, and I got into this deep dive around nutrition, like, the quality of the food that we're eating, and maybe that's influencing tissue strength and bone density and all this. So who knows?
Tom Inclin and I had a real good conversation about this probably about 3 weeks ago. He made a point. He said because I was asking him, like, how come when we look back at like some of those old strong men, and we look at some, these individuals from turn of the century, obviously they didn't have the training aspect that we had, but why were these dudes so thick and strong? And Tom's like, the food was dramatically different. He's like, if this had been 100 years ago and you'd eaten the diet that you're eating today, he goes, the nutrients and just the nutrient density and the quality of the food was so much higher. He's like, now we have to supplement the shit out of people to even try to get close to what it was. But that only takes a lot of blood work and fine tuning and this. And he's like, the quality of the food is just not what it used to. And he made a good point. He goes, if you'd eaten your diet 100 years ago, he goes, it would be dramatically different for what we'd seen today. And he goes, it's just, and he's really in that nutrient testing and does all this blood work, works a ton with cancer patients. And he's like, people are just, even the people that eat incredible, he's like, that eat as close to the diet that we recommend. He goes, they just don't have the same nutrients in the levels that we would expect. And he goes, the only thing we can figure is that there's just lack of nutrient density in the food. That's
really depressing.
It is. Oh, it's totally depressing. So I get a daily newsletter. There's what's it called? It's called the Genetic Literacy Project, and it's pretty interesting. I get this thing, and they're funded by Monsanto. And so it's basically all this propaganda for GMOs and how, glycophosphates never hurt anybody. And it's pretty funny. And I get it just to kind of have this, like, I know who's behind it. And so I get it to kind of laugh. And I remember I've been reading it for years. So just every day for like a few minutes, I'll go through and I'll be like, oh God, it's like reading like the political stuff that's so skewed on one side. Like, you're reading the New York Times, and I read one today that said that, the largest decrease that we've had in COVID cases, we're winning this war, started on January 21st. And that's when their graph showed it just dropped. And it's like, I'm like reading it and I'm like, well, the day the evil orange man left and we brought in Biden, now all of a sudden we're winning the war in this thing and we're opening back. It's really funny. But yeah, the same thing with that Genetic Literacy Project.
Their mission, John just pulled this up, science, not ideology. Mission is to aid the public, media, and policymakers in understanding the science and implications of human and agricultural genetics.
And if you look at who funds them, it's Monsanto. And it's basically talks about, so like when I got all my blood work done recently and all my testing, I was like abnormally high for all these environmental toxins. And we were going through them, and it's like, gasoline and, glycophosphate that we don't even use, that are just within the food. So I asked Tom, I'm like, is this normal? He's like, yes, this is totally normal. And the numbers that you're looking at aren't high at all. He's like, the people that are out using Roundup and all that, he's like, I can tell you that the glycophosphate absorbs through the hands and starts causing some of these issues. And he goes, people are having these problems. And unless you do some pretty jiggy testing, you don't really see it, and nobody really looks for it. So it's pretty interesting in that regard. But yeah, I mean, it's absorbed within the food, and then you're eating it. Like Tom was saying that corn. So everybody that he does testing now, and me in the same way, like have these huge allergies to corn. And I asked him why, and he's like, the only thing we can figure is the GMO, because the research we have, nobody was allergic to corn up until this point, and now people are more allergic to corn than they were to peanuts and soy and wheat. So I don't know. I mean, would I go in if a guy had a non-contact femur fracture, would I go in there and do extensive blood testing and figure out why? 100%. Like, I'd be like, whoa, this just isn't some random occurrence. Something crazy's happening here. We got to get to the bottom of this.
Red flag. Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying, that our food supply is now a repository for toxins, which is pretty scary. And can I just grow vegetables in my backyard? Is that the solution? I have no idea. Where do those seeds come from?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't. Dude, I was thinking about you in the last couple days. I had a guy hit me up for programming, and more importantly, how to use EMS. And I've had a few people hit me up recently, and I'm like, there's so much information out there on it that, and I always tell them, like, do you have an EMS device, and are you using it? Yes. Okay. It's better than not using it. How you're using it is really the fine tuning, but it's just funny. Like, people, and I know you've put out a ton of stuff. I have like a free thing, like I put out to people and send it to them, and people still hit me up on that. And I'm like, man, this isn't witch doctory the way people think it is. But, and I'm sure, how many NFL players are you working with that actually are using it and using it the way they should?
Not enough. Like, again, when COVID hit, I told you guys that I had contacted some suppliers, and I said, hey, they've got a stipend for exercise equipment, and maybe they can't get weights. Like, they should all get a stim unit. And some teams expressed some interest, but there was no follow-up whatsoever. And I think a lot of people thought that it was just a stretch to get players, who may not understand how to use it, or will they use it, or, it's EMS, it's so way out there. Let's just send them a dumbbell or a kettlebell. So I think that education piece has to be pushed a lot harder. And unfortunately, there's, you'll see stuff on, on infomercials about Dr. Hose, and it looks a little sketchy.
Yeah.
So, I get it, but at the same time, I get more buy-in from parents who have college athletes, or athletes who are trying to get to college, where they will say, okay, let's do this. The kid's going to be away from home. I want something to help with their muscle tone management, strengthening, rehab, whatever. So I've had more buy-in on that level than I've had at the pro level, which is unfortunate.
Most of my, when I get hit up with consults or clients over 40, I recommend every one of them. I'm like, hey, how many motor units are you recruiting per workout? They're like, I don't know. How do you count that? And I'm like, well, here's the problem. For every injury and all your shitty mechanics and all the time and history that you've gone through and injuries and whatnot, all of that is a or down regulation. So let's say you go in and, you bang some heavy weights, and we're trying to get max motor unit recruitment. How many are getting recruited? I don't know, but I'll tell you how we're going to get 100%. We're going to use the EMS devices either before and after. And I found for some of our older athletes, actually using it before almost awakened things and allowed them to do better. And, for our younger athletes that are, don't have the injuries and that, they jump in and, we'll use them to kind of clean it up and make sure they recruit all those motor units. But all of a sudden, all the older athletes that I'm working with that use it beforehand are all of a sudden fucking smashing things. And they're like, oh my God, I've never felt this explosive. I haven't felt this good. I'm recovering faster. I feel like I'm getting more quality work done. And I'm like, and they're like, is it this simple? I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. And I think for NFL players too, because so much of that motor unit recruitment, and you understand the mechanism better than I, just gets blunted due to this injury, systemic inflammation, all these other factors. Yep. And they can't access some of these high order type stuff Now all of a sudden they put on the devices. Now they're getting that max unit recruitment, and it almost teaches, and that, I mean, that's what happened to me when I ruptured my patella and then got connected with Charlie through Mauro de Pasquale. And it was the EMS device. Hey, you can't get that thing to fire. You're going to use this device. It's going to teach you how to fire your quad. And then eventually your brain will figure it out. And it worked. So
and it's a great diagnostic tool. Like if I have something going on in this elbow or this knee or this hip, put it on, and the EMS device basically supports that finding, right? Like I need more millivolts to fire that quad because the knee's buggered up, right? And so as those things start to balance out, and I need maybe 20 milliamps or whatever it is on either side, and it balances out, guess what? The knee pain is gone. So it is good for, like, there was somebody I did a test on total knee replacement, and it took 20 milliamps for one side total knee replacement, 150. Right. And then as we went through the rehab, that came down so that it narrowed down to now it's like 20, 35, but it's a lot better, let's just say.
I mean, like the other one we've been messing a bunch with is the occlusion. So I firmly believe, and I'm testing this with one of my older guys, I think that doing maybe 3 bouts a week of occlusion with daily EMS mixed in with a pretty smart strength conditioning program, with, making sure we're hitting different rep ranges and, bilateral and unilateral and enough pulling and pushing, and just a smart kind of 3-4 day a week mixed in with every other day, mixing up an arms and a lower with some occlusion, and then making sure that they're using some EMS. I really think that to me is probably one of the smartest approaches I've seen. And when I look at NFL players, I think, dude, if I had NFL guys coming in, especially if they were beat up, I would have them do some form of occlusion training early in the season, kind of build that GPP, put on a little bit more muscle mass, not beat up their ligaments and their tendons and their joints. Use the EMS device to make sure we're getting max unit recruitment, get them really good on the aerobic base, lift some heavy weights, make sure their trunk is stable, and then kind of get them through that phase, and then just fucking put your foot on the gas pedal. And it doesn't, a good point. And it like that feels like the right move, especially in this environment. Because if they went out to private training facilities and they kind of contracted, they could do some stuff like that. I just think with the facility and some bigger stuff, I just think that it's just easier just to put guys through the line. All right, here's your workout. Here's your coach. Go through. Get the fuck out of here.
Derek, have you seen occlusion at any NFL teams at all that you've worked with?
I know that they are using it as part of some RTP, because they're obviously, like, at the combine, they'll have somebody come in and do a course for PFATs. And I know some teams are using it a little more than others, but it's certainly, it is a bit of a flavor of the month to some degree too. So they're kind of using it with everything. Right. So I like the idea, John's idea of, like, you combine it with EMS. So you get the recruitment piece, and you get the hypertrophy and the tissue growth and all that. And then I've also been looking at both of those. There's a group here that I'm helping out, and they're looking at PRP and stem cell injections and kind of bundling all those things together. So you have, the initial phase when you do the injection and you don't want to disrupt it. So you're using EMS to provide some passive loading and pain management, and then the occlusion as well. So I think there's a lot of, I hate the word biohack, but to some degree, we are kind of looking at these innovative ways to kind of speed things up with tight timelines. And so,
well, it's pretty fascinating, man. Like I think I first heard the term PRP probably like in 2003, 2004. And then the big thing was the PRP and then the stem cell. And it was interesting because the stem cell research was kind of lackluster. Like they were talking about, hey, stem cells are going to fix everything. And then the problem was the results weren't necessarily meeting what they were looking for. And then they figured out the exomes, and, the exomes of the RNA that allow the stem cells to talk, and they were washing it. So the stem cells had no way to communicate. When they figured out that piece of the RNA with the exosomes, that I think is where things have gotten really, really fascinating. And when you look at the research of them, scaffolding using fat for the stem cells and then putting the exosomes on top, I mean, that's really pretty fascinating. I was talking to Tom Incledon, and they've done some research with ALS patients and people that have had Parkinson's, where they've done systemic exosome IVs and seen improvements within their conditions. Obviously because the exosomes are small enough to go across the brain-blood barrier. So, man, there's so much jiggy shit out there. There's so much cool stuff. And, unfortunately, I think there's a very, very small percentage of people that actually know what they're doing, but there's a lot of people peddling a lot of stuff. And so when I get hit up on this deal, I'm like, that's not exactly what I've read. And more importantly, that's not what I've talked to from the people that are kind of cutting edge on this thing. But, it's pretty fascinating. Like Dr. Ants, who did my shoulder surgery, he's pretty much, they've done a ton of research in terms of like pulling stem cells out of bone marrow and spinning it down and then, using some other procedures and seeing, pretty good effects of it. But I think for these players, like there's so much out there. There's so much interesting research. All they have to do is put it into a system and then be consistent to use it. But it also takes a certain expertise. I mean, like when it comes to the EMS stuff, I mean, I default to you, but it's interesting that we kind of came at it from the same place and kind of looked at it from this idea of a performance device. Whenever I see it marketed, it's marketed as a recovery device. And I'm like, no. This isn't a recovery device. This is a performance device. Unfortunately, it's hard to sell that in the performance market.
Yeah. And in Europe, it's marketed as a toning and aesthetic device, right? Which is too bad. But I kind of look at you as kind of a 1%er where you're this anomaly. Like this is what you did for your off-season training. This is what you're doing with EMS. And, the other 99% is kind of missing the boat. Do you guys get into those discussions about how do we expand that 1%?
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem we run into all too often is, I think people think about like, hey, this is what I can do. This is the environment I can control, right? I mean, everybody's done this. Like, hey, we use barbells, and it's just like I think everybody's just kind of copying what everybody else does because it's safe. And I think with NFL guys, because they're so talented and because they have so much genetic opportunity to do things, all you have to do is put them into a system that's not going to hurt them. And I think when they're in that mindset of like, well, I just want to hurt these guys. I get that. But how are you going to, how can you force them to improve if we don't stress them in different ways? Okay, you don't want to try to load up the squat with 1,000 pounds. I get it. But there's other ways for us to stress it. I think the EMS device was, it is one of the smartest. I mean, geez, Charlie was talking about that, 25 years ago. I mean, dude, I talked to him in 99. So
I have an article from like 81 that I can send to you that he wrote. Yeah. Like it's crazy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think he wrote in T Nation about it maybe. There's like, it was in his book. I mean, he was using it. I mean, the fact that information and that technology has been around for as long as it has and is still not being utilized absolutely blows my mind. Did
he have his athletes use it before competition? Like, are we going to see it or hear about any NFL guys using it this weekend, Derek?
In special cases, I think he did in terms of like, if it was, again, either to bring the muscle tone up to kind of provide readiness or bring it down if it was, hypertonic. So I think you can see that. And I even know that they, Charlie had a lot of influence with Al Vermeil and things that happened during Al Vermeil's time at the Bulls. And I know there was talk about how they used different types of stim, during the playoffs. I think, it was whether it was Rodman or Pippen or somebody with their back or something, and they had an approach for it. So, again, yes, it should be used. But do they have the knowledge and the confidence to do it? On the sidelines or whatever? I think they should, but it's a big leap, John, I think. And I just, I wish it was being used more.
The funny part is, and I just remember the comment, if you're not sweating on the top of your lip and like almost reaching for it to pull it and turn it off, then you're not going hard enough. Like you have to have that sweat, like you have to literally ramp it up. And I remember the comment was like, the minute that it starts to feel okay, you got to go up and you have to push the intensity to the point where, it gets to the point where you feel like you're going to cramp, something's going to rip, and you're going to, effectively kind of push it. And when I started doing that, that's when I saw the performance gains. And the harder part though is conveying that to people. And not maybe people are like, oh, like everybody that I've seen that's had lackluster responses with EMS is because they don't understand that piece. Like we had a guy here this weekend who had a patellar tendon injury, and he was talking to me, and he had, I had a mid patella. I think he had top of the kneecap patella, and he's had all these issues. And I'm like, hey, are you using any EMS devices? Yeah, I've been using the Mark Pro. I'm like, doesn't go high enough. It's a recovery device. It doesn't have the megahertz, and it doesn't have the settings that I would need to do this. And then I asked him, I'm like, how are you using it? And he's like, oh, I'm like, okay, so you're using it in terms of like pulsing. That's not what you need. And so I told him like, hey, go check out the power dots if you have access to a Compex, and I need you to do those higher register ones. And I explained it to him, like, send me an email, I'll send you the information sheet I put together on how to do this. And I mean, we went out with the guys at Development Group and brought EMS devices to them. And I took them, I controlled it. And I was like, this is how this is done. And these dudes were like, ah. And I'm like, on deployment, this is what you guys should be using. So it helps to have somebody explain it to you that way, where you're kind of constantly chasing that piece. And, that's kind of the way to do it, at least the way that we've seen it done well.
Yeah. And I think that's a real problem on the research side, is that you cannot do that kind of study where you're getting people to like bite on the leather strap and push it to that limit. Cause I just don't think from an ethics point of view, that's going to fly. Right. I always remember in psych class, they always showed that one where you would shock the person, and I guess there were fake shocks and all that. And everybody's like, oh my God, like, this is an example of what would happen in Nazi Germany. Like, how you can get people to follow you. But I just don't think you could actually shock people that much with the EMS to get the effects you're talking about, the adaptation you're talking about, because nobody would volunteer for that study. Or they would run screaming out of the room, right? Yeah,
I mean, but when I couldn't fire my quad, so it was that mid-patellar rupture. 3 weeks I didn't get out of bed. 3 months I didn't bend my quad. I couldn't even get my quad to fire. And all of a sudden I'm at like 6 months, and I'm thinking, like, my NFL career is done. Like I have like 6 months to get ready to go. Like the amount of time and what I did in those first 6 months. Like I'm like, shit. Like I'm out of this job. And it was through that connection. And all of a sudden, within 3 weeks of doing it, where I would just go home, I'd do it before, I'd do it after, opposing muscles. And I would ramp that thing up to the point where I was like, this is fucking either going to electrocute me or someone's going to shock. Within 3 months, all of a sudden, everything rewired. And I was the starter on game day, the following year. And whenever people ask me, I'm like, the training didn't change. We didn't do anything else. The only change was that EMS device. And I wish I'd known about occlusion, because I would have been fucking doing a ton of occlusion to try to get more muscle mass and more density in the leg, and, think about the healing properties associated with it. But the only difference was that EMS device. And I've told people this for 20 years. Even when I was a current NFL player and people would have that injury, I'd tell them, hey, go get one of these. This is how I did it. And people never did it.
It's so sad.
Yeah. I mean, ACL tears, like it's, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's like, for you, coaching sprinting and being like, hey man, like this is how you run fast. And then people don't listen, and you're like, okay, well, I guess you don't want to run fast. It just, I think you get to a point where you're like, man, am I taking crazy pills? Because this, who knows?
Yeah, no, you can only bang your head on the wall so many times before you're like, okay, let's move on to something else here. I know it works. And yeah, it's unfortunate. So.
Well, I know one of the best things as a coach is to just sit back on game day and enjoy the experience and speed and display of athleticism for your athletes. So let's get to game day.
Well, I was going to say that any predictions on this thing? What do you think Mahomes is going to do? You think it's just going to turn into a shootout?
I kind of hoping it does. Like, it seems like Kansas City, if we look at the previous 2 years when they were in the AFC Championship against Brady, it was sort of like, let's just, throw the ball downfield, big plays and all that, where I think they've evolved into being more strategic. And just even these simple things like, the last game, Tyreek Hill went off in the first quarter, wasn't it? He got, almost 250 yards in the first quarter. And I think to some degree they should have that threat a bit, but against the Bills, throw it to him underneath, pitch it to him 70 yards like McCole Hardman. I think that kind of short game that could have the potential to be long gains is going to be interesting. And I just can't see them not going to that. And hopefully Sammy Watkins is ready to play. And then that adds a new dimension, and Edwards-Helaire. And so this sort of short passing motion type offense, I think is going to be pretty interesting. And I just don't, if they're doing it right, I know Tampa Bay's defense is supposed to be pretty good, but I just can't see them having the same speed to match that,
Yeah, well, we're looking at 56 as the over-under at the total points, so that's pretty high.
Well, the thing which I said this on the podcast with Jason, the thing I love about the Chiefs defense is how stingy they are. They just like don't give up points. Like they kind of, the people will get some throws and they kind of move the ball on them. And then all of a sudden they just bow up. It's so like I don't need a defense that's going to go out and annihilate people. I just need a stingy defense that like lets you run a 12-play drive and then go 3 and out. That lets you go, 18 plays and kick a field goal. I mean, like that stingy defense, which is, what I think the Chiefs have, is so good. And I'm like, man, it's good. And they have some really good lockdown corners. I mean, dude, those guys can play man-to-man better than anybody. So it's a stingy defense and an explosive offense, which to me is a pretty good combination for a Super Bowl team. I think with Brady, the problem is you got this old man, weird mojo magic that like, fuck, like like I was like, I don't know what deal he made, but if I hear that he went out to the crossroads and found Robert Johnson, I wouldn't doubt it. I'd be like, this is, straight up Robert Johnson crossroads shit.
Well, he does fatigue and age set in. In last week during the championships, 3 second half interceptions. In the first half, he looked amazing. Mm-hmm. Will it set in?
I don't know. I mean, I saw the best meme I've seen. They showed like an old goat and like a baby goat, and they were like battle of the goats. And I thought that was perfect, But I think if Mahomes wants to be the heir apparent, and, I think for him to put a diamond in his crown, he's going to have to go beat the man. So it's going to be good. I'm excited.
Yeah. And I think we've seen Brady have some bad games and lose. But the Mahomes thing is interesting. Like, I think if they get behind, it almost like supercharges them. And, like if you look last year, whether it was Houston or Tennessee, they got behind and that just drives them. I think when they get ahead early, I think they there's not that urgency. So I'm interested to see just how it plays out. And if they do get behind or if it's tight and then, they get a little more risky, they tend to run more plays on 4th down. So I don't know. I can't, obviously I'm biased here, but I just can't see how what you said on the defensive side, the pass rush seems to be picking up for Kansas City through the playoffs like last year. Just all the weapons on offense, special teams. I don't know. It just seems like they've got everything covered. And, but like you said, the Brady wild card there could, he could come out and just have precision passing and just, see the field differently than other people. So I don't know. I think it's still going to be exciting, just the anticipation. But when it comes down to it, will Mahomes just be too tough, like just too tough? He's not going to make as many mistakes. He's going to, he might run for a couple of 3rd down, runs here and there just to kind of keep things going. He just seems to have too much going on for him right now that I don't think Brady has. So we'll see. I don't know.
Well, either way, it's going to be a hell of a game. All right. Well, I think that's good. Thanks, Derek, for jumping on Power Athlete Radio. We really appreciate it. And always great to have an expert and chop it up. And, thanks to my co-host, Mr. Chris McQuilkin, a.k.a. Tex.
Oh, yeah. And once we figure out what the hell's going on in the off season, we'll get you back on, Derek, to see if this is the proper way to analyze and prevent, hopefully, injuries going into the new year.
Well, if you get reached out by anybody in this area, man, swing by. We could always, we got a full facility if you ever want to bring anybody in. So it'd be great to, see you in person and get to chop it up a little bit.
Well, I mean, that's definitely going to be my recommendation for some of these teams is like, you got to seek, do your due diligence and find out where you can place your players, whatever you can do. I think that's going to be really important because I'm just tired of seeing like, the guys out on the beach doing the sand workouts and, Instagram magic stuff. And I want to see guys doing, all the good training, the weights, the plyos, the sprinting, all the multi-directional stuff properly. And I don't see enough of that right now. So I think you're right. The wave is going to hit and, we're going to see problems maybe in a year or two where people haven't had this type of training. And for the most part, I would like to think that most of the teams are offering that when they get into their off-season training. But there's always ways you can make it better. So I think I'm a real fan of like the private sector people who do it well. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well,
cool. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, that was great.
Awesome.
Now it's time for you to empower your performance. Head to powerathletehq.com/training to choose from a number of programs to meet your specific performance goals. And if you like to break a mental sweat too, visit academy.powerathletehq.com and become a real stakeholder in you or your athlete's success. Until next time, bye!